Look, welcome everybody. Very pleased to see you all here today, and on behalf of Kensington and Swan, I'm very proud and pleased to welcome the Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, with us today. There are a few preliminary matters which I'm obliged to get through before we begin our talk proper. First of all, if you hear the fire alarm, you should go out the doors behind you, the main doors, and exit that way. Separately, if you need to go to the toilet, and don't confuse the two, on the mezzanine floor there are toilets. If you go out the door, the main door, later on, it might not let you back in, so that would be an issue. Privacy, as I'm learning to say on my return to New Zealand. It's of massive importance today, highly relevant to the success of businesses to manage privacy in the right way. Huge amounts of personal information are collected by today's IT systems and by organisations and employers about customers and staff. So good privacy practice is fundamental to success. And it's a key time of change in New Zealand as well, with the Privacy Bill coming through, and I think the Select Committee report on the Privacy Bill is due tomorrow, so key time for us to be thinking about privacy issues and how we should manage them. I've just returned from the UK 6 months ago, worked there for 18 years as a lawyer, and I had the pleasure of seeing the introduction of the GDPR in the UK environment. It's fair to say it was a shock to the system for many employers. They hadn't been thinking about privacy issues at all. They hadn't been thinking about information flows, let alone thinking about how they should be compliant. And it took them a huge amount of work to get close to compliant by the time that the Act came into force. So I think as we look at the Privacy Bill now and what that might mean for New Zealand, perhaps now is the time for employers and organisations generally to be thinking about setting their house in order. And on that note, I just want to introduce our speakers today. And the star of the show is John Edwards, sitting in the middle here. John was appointed to the independent statutory position of Privacy Commissioner in 2014. He's just started his second term. Prior to his appointment, he practiced law in Wellington for over 20 years, specialising in human rights and information law, and representing a wide range of public and private sector clients. He's acted in legal roles for the Ministry of Health, State Services Commission, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and the Inland Revenue. John blogs and tweets regularly. I found a national portrait of him, it was called, on the Dominion Post from 2016. It says that privacy doesn't sound sexy and Edwards isn't much in the news. In fact, his job is a lot sexier than it sounds. And Edwards a much tougher nut than he looks. It went on to refer, kindly I think, to his black cap of hair styled somewhere between beetle and pudding bowl. I'm not sure if you saw that, John. But I think there might be sort of an information correction issue there to address, because I think you are now very much in the news, and of course you have very well styled hair. So welcome, John. I also want to introduce my colleague Hayley Miller. Innovation is at the heart of Hayley's practice. She's developed a multidisciplinary practice in the intersection of technology, privacy and consumer law. She assists clients with the commercialisation of technology in a wide range of areas and industries, and also is an expert on New Zealand privacy law. So welcome, Hayley. And then, last but not least, Charlotte,
Comment on my head.
or your dress, no. Charlotte, last but not least, my fellow employment specialist. She assists a wide range of both international and domestic clients on issues that arise with their employees, including personal grievances, trade relations, restraints of trade and restructures. And she deals on a daily basis, like many employment lawyers, with privacy issues as they concern employers and employees. She's ranked in the Chamber's Asia Pacific 2018 directory as a recognised practitioner for employment, and also sits on the board of directors for the Auckland Chamber of Commerce. So I think we've got a good panel for you here today, and it's a very simple format. I've got the very easy role of asking the questions. I don't have to answer them, but these three will, and primarily I hope John will give us some insight as the Privacy Commissioner on some of the key issues which we now face. There is one thing I should mention, which is that we've set up the Slido app. So there's a hashtag privacy QA, which you can use to pose questions on that app as we go through the talks, the Q&A today. And at the end, if there's time, I hope there will be, we'll have a look at some of those and address them to the panel as well. So without further ado, My first question is about privacy notices. So let's consider an organisation's website which has a notice regarding the use and storage of information. How do we know if this is sufficient to comply with the organisation's obligations under the Privacy Act? And the question refers to 1993, but I wonder about in the future as well as we look at what the Privacy Act might mean in the future.
It won't change very much.
Yeah.
So the answer to the question, how do we know? It probably doesn't.
Right.
It's pretty easy to comply with the Privacy Act with these. All you're required to do is look at Information Privacy Principle 3. And that says that before you collect personal information from someone, you've got to take reasonable steps to ensure that they are aware of the fact that information is being collected, the purpose for collection, the intended recipients of the information, the name and address of the organisation collecting and which will store the information, whether the collection is voluntary or mandatory, and the consequences, if any, for not providing it, and that the individuals concerned have the right to request access or correction of the information. So it's a real simple test to tell whether it complies. And if it doesn't do all those things, jump onto our website, privacy.org.nz, and find this little widget called Privomatic, and spend 2 minutes, and you will be delivered a privacy statement which complies with the Privacy Act.
Right. And is it okay to have one notice across your whole organisation, or for different purposes, different notices?
Probably not, and it's a really good question, James. And I started gracelessly. I should have begun by thanking Kensington Swan for the opportunity and to you all for coming along to learn about this stuff. Really pleased because it's important. So I'm always happy to give out my time. But no, look, I think probably not. What I see quite often is an organisation, a complex organisation. Some poor web designer cuts and pastes a privacy notice from somewhere they found online, probably the wrong country, and it actually doesn't say anything about that business, and it probably doesn't deal with the customer interface and the meat space interface, and it probably doesn't deal with the HR issues, and it probably doesn't deal with a whole lot of other things. So it might look like, okay, we've checked that box, but does it do what it's supposed to do? Does it disclose how the information is going to be used? And people often underestimate how important that is, because this is how you inoculate yourself from the risks of privacy breach. If you've told people up front, you don't need to worry that a subsequent disclosure is going to be a breach of the Privacy Act. You get to write your own Privacy Act here.
There's some incredibly long ones now, so I think it's in New Zealand that you've got to listen to about half an hour of privacy information before you get to talk to somebody. Is that quite common now that you're saying that?
It's increasingly common because that's how they, design their customer interface. If you want to talk, we're going to collect your information, here's how we're going to use it. But I think we're probably seeing increasing sophistication. And James, maybe you've seen this in Europe with the GDPR, but my counterparts over there are really starting to look at, is a 20-page legalese document actually reasonable steps to inform people? It may be comprehensive and boilerplate, but if it doesn't convey the information in a really easily absorbable way, then it's not doing what it's there for. Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of innovation in how you convey that with icons and tabs, graduated consents and things. Have you seen some of this?
Yeah, absolutely. The stuff coming out of the UK is quite, as a lawyer, it sort of gives you the slight heebies because it's got pictures and colour and it's very short. But it actually does get to the heart of, I think, what you have to say, which is what am I going to do with your information? And I think there's a big push as well towards disclosure at the time. So, can you have one? I'd argue no, but that's your backstop. It's sort of just your just in case. Here's kind of what we do as an organisation. What I tend to find is clients have got this thing that they last did probably in 1995, and it hasn't been updated for the website. So it doesn't deal with Google integration. It doesn't deal with APIs for Facebook. You've got all these cool things on their website. You've never updated it, and it just talks about for the website. Whereas actually now they're linking to it, using it in all sorts of places. And if the employment team thinks that it's going to work for HR, then it really, really won't.
Yeah. Quick show of hands. Who's read a privacy notice on a website? Oh, it's better than I thought. So impressive. Very good. And that wasn't because it was part of your job? No. Okay. Moving on to the next question. So, disclosure to overseas entities. Imagine a company in China has a subsidiary in New Zealand. The HR manager based in China asks the New Zealand-based HR team to transfer all New Zealand employee information to him so that it can be centralised. What should the New Zealand-based HR people be thinking about? What should they be doing?
Because they're diligent and worried about risk, they'll be wondering whether they're allowed to. And the answer to that is probably yes. They need to be conscious that whatever risk is associated with that, they bear here in New Zealand. So if there is a liability, they're going to wear it. So having turned their minds to that, they need to think, well, how do we mitigate this risk? Are there, do we have confidence that we have the same level of security standard at the head office in Guangzhou or wherever it is? How do we ensure that our company systems are sufficient to meet our domestic obligations to retrieve that if, for example, the employee requests it? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
What do you reckon, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think that's right. And when I worked with James in the UK, there are a lot more stringent rules over there when they're transferring data offshore. But I think the fact that it's a jurisdiction which doesn't have the same privacy regime as we do, you do have to exercise an additional caution to make sure you've got security in place.
And we are seeing some changes in the bill, so I don't want to talk about those in too much detail because the Select Committee is working on that, so it's a parliamentary process. But when that bill gets reported back, we're going to see cross-border transfers much more tightly regulated, and this is going to become much more of an issue. So you'll need to all bone up and send some advice to your clients about how they transfer information in these kinds of circumstances. This one might be still okay because it's the same company.
Yeah.
But,
you mentioned that they have to be careful because they might be liable. Do you mean it's possible that the individual manager might be liable or the company?
Yeah, pretty unlikely that the individual manager. We do that from time to time, no, it's the company liable. But of course, every manager spends every day thinking of ways of keeping the company safe and managing the liability.
Of course they do. Yeah. I want to move on to a question about employment references. So let's envisage that we're undertaking reference checks on an applicant. We think the applicant's perfect for the role. We notice that they don't have a reference from their current employer. We know the HR advisor there, so this is a very common situation actually. Is it okay just to give that person a call?
Okay, I want to take a poll. Who says yes?
Who's done it?
Who says yes?
Who truthfully has never done this?
Who says no, but do it anyway? So you have to give them C. No.
Nice simple answer.
Nope. Yeah. And why would you? I mean, that person, the Privacy Act is about respecting the autonomy and dignity of an individual. They have exercised that when they have said, I want you to speak to A and B. If they haven't put C on the list, you are entitled to ask them why. And they should have an answer. And if that answer is, actually, that person sexually assaulted me, and that's why I haven't put them on the list, and I don't want you to talk to them, then you've got a good answer, right? And if they say, well, if that's going to be a deal breaker, this is not the job that I want, then they get to exercise that autonomy.
John, just building on that question, what if the HR advisor heard that this person was applying for a role and rang the new HR manager and said, hey, I know this person. What's your view then?
What do you think?
Well, it's unsolicited in that circumstance. I think the HR advisor is breaching privacy by passing on the information, but you're not actually soliciting it, so it falls outside Privacy Act.
So again,
you've got to be careful what you get.
You're right. So it's not a collection that's in breach of the Act, but once you have that information, you owe certain responsibilities of ensuring that it's complete, accurate, relevant, up-to-date, not misleading. That's, as we all know, Information Privacy Principle 8. And again, you've got to be able to defend these decisions. So if you receive this unsolicited information, can you just rely on it? without checking, without giving the individual the opportunity to comment.
I'm just going to cut across the questions a little bit. There's a related issue there. Let's imagine that very serious complaints have been made about an individual. They're mere allegations. I've dealt with cases like this in the UK. The question is, they're so serious, you need to do something about them potentially, but you're not quite sure what. And it might take a long time to deal with them. Do you hold them on the file? Can you hold on the file allegations which are very serious, which you've got no foundation for? Or do you need to go and investigate them before you can do that? It's quite tricky.
That wasn't on the slide, Pat.
Sorry. It just occurred to me, because I dealt with a High Court case in the UK where that happened, involved a priest with allegations of child abuse in the past, from the distant past. No way to easily check it, but obviously very serious information about that individual, which affected their ability to get new roles. And the question was, just storing it, knowing it's a mere allegation, but can you keep it knowing it's a mere allegation? Maybe it's a bit tough to answer in 2 minutes, as I feel a bit unfair now.
I mean, my most consistent response to hypotheticals is it depends.
Yeah.
I mean, there will be situations where an organisation is asked why they did nothing. You knew about this in 1995. Why did you do nothing? And if you haven't kept a record, then you don't have an answer to that. Something might come along. I mean, this is the importance, I guess, of having a policy in advance. You know, what is your policy on that?
Yeah.
The Privacy Act doesn't tell you how long you can keep that. You have created a risk for yourself because you've got that information which is incredibly prejudicial. And if you don't have adequate protections around who gets to access that file, that could leak out around the organisation and render the person's ongoing employment untenable. So how do you manage that risk? You know, how long are you going to keep it if there's no substantiation of the allegations?
That's right. A local example would be serious bullying allegations, and the person resigns before you can carry out that investigation. But hypothetically, WorkSafe might want to investigate those allegations later and destroy the records or don't hold them. You might have some issues dealing with the regulator as well.
Excellent points. So coming back to the reference point, your applicant tells you to ring the current employer and the applicant's manager asks to speak off the record. Once again, can you do it?
Who says yes? Who says no? The ayes have it. Sort of. I need to accommodate my colleague who said no. The Privacy Act says that you can provide information under an obligation of confidence, either that the confidence either in relation to the identity of the person providing the information or the substance. And what that means is you're using a formula which is going to prevent you from having to disclose this from the individual. So Section 29 or something says you can withhold evaluative material. So that is reference checking. I mean, strictly speaking, the words off the record are not accurate. But I'm assuming what this person means by off the record is, can I tell you something that you won't attribute to me in relation to this person? Now, to me, that's a signal that this is a conversation that's under an obligation of confidence, that later, when the person says, give me all the information you have about me, that record of that conversation can justifiably be withheld.
Yeah.
It doesn't absolve you of the responsibility of treating the employee or prospective employee fairly and taking reasonable steps to ensure the accuracy of the information.
Yes.
And that may involve putting the substance of the allegation to the individual for their comment.
One point that Hayley and I kind of disagree on this, John, is whether you would take a note of it. And then Hayley says no notes. I'm in the take a note that it's confidential.
Well, the risk here, I mean, the problem is, why are we having this argument? There should be no ambiguity about this. The problem is that we're both, each side is assuming what off the record means. So that's a conversation we need to have with that person and say, well, I have to write it down because what if I walk out of here and get hit by a bus and we hire this train wreck? So I am going to make a record. It is going to be on the record, but I can undertake that we won't tell the person that that's what you said.
Because that's the point, it's an express or an implied promise.
Yep.
You can take the implied to the off the record, but probably better to confirm that that's what.
Yeah.
So our next question is about surveillance and monitoring. What privacy concerns should organisations consider when drafting policies relating to monitoring employees, e.g. in relation to monitoring their internet use or where they're driving their company vehicles?
I want to hear what Hayley has to say about this one.
Yeah, I mean, they need to be updated, would be the first bit. A, you should have one, and B, updated, because technology moves really quickly. Most of the stuff that I'm looking at updating is, and where businesses are grappling, is making sure the technology doesn't capture more than it needs to. You know, it might have really good business reasons to do surveillance, health and safety, somebody's out on site. I was at a conference last week, they had some amazing kit that somebody wears, and if they stop moving, I sit under the sun and eat their lunch, it will send off an alarm unless they hit the button.
Does it give them an electric shock?
Yeah. There's a whole heap of law around that, they're not allowed to do that. But it's quite cool stuff, and it's all about safety. And so I asked sort of the question, when do you encourage them to put it on? Oh no. And then just keep updating your policies. As John said, it's all about, we've got this thing where we disclose. Item 3, just tell people what you're doing with the information and be really transparent, keep it up to date. And that definitely applies on this.
I've got a bit of a list for our employment side of things, and you can tell me if I just anything off. So the type of monitoring that will or may take place, why monitoring is necessary, frequency of the monitoring, the level of the monitoring, disciplinary consequences, consequences for refusing the employee to collect the information in this way, and what will happen with the information that the employer collects, which includes who sees it, how it's stored, if it may be disclosed outside the business, and where it will be stored for how long, and whether it's going to be destroyed. And of course the right of access to it and correction of it.
That sounds pretty good. We had a case that was publicly reported about NZ Post's little golf cart lanes. And they were leaving the depot and tootling around the streets and avoiding cats and all that sort of thing. And it came to the attention of an NZ Post employee that not only was there a camera on this device, but it was collecting audio all day. And they and their union complained to us about that. Now we found that that was an over-collection of personal information. It was disproportionate. The purpose, I think, was reverse engineered, and which is often the case with tech, right? You buy a new widget, hey, this is going to improve your efficiency on the round, and you don't think through it. And later when someone goes, did you realise that we've got audio and video recording 24/7 on this thing? Oh, we need that for health and safety. Well, you've got to have a really good business case at the outset, and you've got to have the kinds of policies packed around that Charlotte described. And so we found NZ Post in breach, and they settled that. They switched off the constant monitoring. I think they switched off the audio all the time.
Interesting thing about this that I find later down the track when everything explodes is sometimes employers won't have a policy, but they'll still look at emails that employees have sent. And part of that is sort of this idea, well, it's our information and we can monitor it, but it's not, as John says, it's not that simple. And in the employment jurisdiction, what we're seeing now, it used to be the case that the court or the authority would go, it's a breach of privacy, but we'll look at it anyway, because we're a jurisdiction that can. But increasingly, we're seeing the court become very reluctant to accept evidence that's been collected in breach of somebody's privacy. So don't just think that the court will look at it anyway, you do need to take it quite seriously now.
Proportionality and process. So don't over-collect, don't keep it for too long. Have a fair process.
Good words. So, turning to internet email policies, if they allow reasonable personal use, but one employee has been very unproductive recently, always seems to be on social networking sites, I'm sure that never happens, Are you entitled as an employer to read through their email and internet history? Any thoughts from our panel?
Depends if you've got a policy to start with. I think that's
So
the
if you-
first message. So have a policy if you want to use it. And then I think there's an element of what's the expectation. So if everybody around them is actually on social media and they've just arrived, there's an element of culture that I think you throw in as well. And then if you do have a right to go digging into emails, be careful what you actually dig into. You know, if it's quite obviously a personal email, then the fact that they were doing it at work time might be relevant, but the content of it is probably where you should stop. You know, just statistics might be all you need. Actually, we notice you're doing a lot of personal emails because we can just tell by who they're to versus reading through them for the sort of tale that they tell.
Sort of.
So about limiting yourself to the metadata, you might.
Yeah.
Do you agree, John?
Yeah, I mean, this worries me, this example, because, you know, we're leaping to a proxy. What employer goes, oh, this person is really unproductive, I better snoop around their email?
Too many, but let's go.
What about having a conversation with them and saying, hey, every time I walk past your desk, you're on Facebook. You know, you're always staring at your phone, checking your Snapchats. What's going on here? You know, I think, again, when we talk about privacy, we're talking about putting the individual at the centre, and snooping around the back end of some social platform, that's pretty snoopy. If you're not swayed by the moral argument, by the propriety or the creepy factor, I've got 3 words for you. Facebook, cake, case.
Does everyone know that case?
Yes. Serious damages. Charlotte, what was on the paper?
I just remember there's a C-bomb in there.
Right.
What's the name of the organisation?
NZCU Baywide, $168,000 of damages by an employer who leaned on a junior staff member to friend a former staff member to get a screenshot of an offensive post on their Facebook page. So, you know, that's a pretty significant...
And then sent it to all of the major competitors within the person's line of work, which probably wasn't their best move. It's one of the highest awards, isn't it?
Yeah, the highest.
Yeah.
So proceed with caution is what you're hearing there.
Okay, let's talk about covert surveillance. I think in a general question, when is this okay? When is it right to do it without telling people? Is it ever right?
In the toilet.
Not.
The engineers are frantically removing the cameras from the toilets before you leave the building.
Well, I think, again, sorry, I don't mean to be soaking up all the oxygen.
No,
but-
we're having a word.
This becomes more and more of an issue because of the ubiquity of the devices. Anyone can be a spy now, right? And I think the courts are moving to recognise that just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. Anyone who wants to delve into this, I mean, how many people here are from public sector organisations? Anyone? We got a couple. So you all got a blast last year from the report commissioned by the State Services Commission about a security, what are they called? Thompson and Clark. The use of security consultants.
Private investigators, essentially.
Yeah, to investigate people who may constitute a threat to staff. Now, you know, when you think about the health and safety risks to people at the Ministry of Social Development, you know, after the Ashburton shooting and things, you might think, well, our tolerant, you know, we've got to do a lot of things. We can do whatever we want to keep our staff safe. The courts are saying it ain't necessarily so. There are limits. Surveillance is an intrusive activity, and it should be carried out under a proper lawful authority and under you know, strict supervision. Sometimes you need to catch a thief, and that's where the proportionality comes back in. Where's the stop going from? Can you, you know, what's the time horizon?
And isn't the difference as well if you are installing surveillance to catch a customer taking product, then you would tell the staff to say this is going in. Whereas if you suspect that it's a member of staff and there's a reasonable basis to have covert surveillance, then you don't.
Yeah, I mean, what are you trying to do here? You want to catch someone or you want to deter someone? If you want to deter someone, then you put notices up everywhere, right? You tell everyone. If you want to catch someone, then you don't do that, but you have to be very much more limited in your activities. We see one of the growth areas in our business is neighbours at war. It does our head in. And,
We've got a couple of those cases.
Mostly, individuals acting in their domestic capacity are not subject to the Privacy Act. We see these things coming in where neighbour A puts a camera facing into neighbour B's yard. They come in every couple of weeks, right, Julia? And we mostly say, sorry, we can't do this. You just have to figure out a way to be civil to each other. Sometimes we investigate because there might be a business there, so we can hang something on that. We had an interesting one where the putative respondent said, oh no, I'm not collecting any information, it's a dummy camera, it's a fake. But you can't tell them that because I'm trying to freak them out.
Oh dear.
I said, you've got to tell them.
Well, let's turn to the topic of investigations. And we're thinking about a situation involving a serious bullying complaint. The complainant is adamant when they raise the issue that the complaint must stay between them and HR. But HR think it needs to be escalated to manage the health and safety risk. How do we reconcile those two competing interests in that situation? Can we pass on the information? Do we need to, in some way, observe the employee's request for the maintenance of confidentiality?
You go, Sean.
So it's a really difficult one, and you know, speaking the other day about how the world is changing, you know, over the last year or so in terms of there being a real corporate responsibility to deal with these sorts of issues properly. And not always just accept when somebody says, I've been seriously bullied, I've been sexually harassed, but please don't tell anyone, you know, because it is actually a risk within your business. And our advice is, well, bring the complainant on the journey with you. You know, if somebody says, I don't want to escalate this, there are ways that an HR professional can usually speak to that individual to make sure that they feel safe progressing the complaint. Even if that's special leave on full pay while the investigation continues, for example. There's lots of different options to try, but I mean, I'm not sure what you think, John, but certainly from an employment law perspective, the ideal position is to get the complainant's consent to do it. And I haven't come across a case where the complainant has consistently said no, when HR has put in a good effort to make sure the person feels safe.
Sounds legit.
Too legit. But John, what about if the complainant did say absolutely not? You cannot tell anybody else.
I mean, I would say, what if a complainant came along and said, there's a room full of oily rags and some kind of sparking machine. You know, that's a workplace hazard. You have a responsibility to deal with that. You know, the conversation that I think needs to happen with the complainant is, if you want to make a complaint, here are the consequences for that. If you want us to, you know, if you don't want to do that, here are the services we can offer you. What kind of conversation are we having? And then if it reaches a certain threshold, you've got to say, well, we need to protect you, but we also have a responsibility to act on this information. Yeah,
and you know, I do think the safety risk is too great just to say, okay, it's your private information, it's confidential, on your merry way. The world is changing at the moment.
The complainant sends a long email about how the respondent's behaviour has affected their mental health, and the respondent then makes a privacy request covering that email, obviously become aware of the complaint. Do you have to disclose it? How do you think, Snow?
I think no on that one. It's more information about the other person.
Right.
So yeah, you don't have to disclose personal information about another individual.
Unless there's a formal investigation into it later. And the employment side takes over from your area and says, well...
Privacy doesn't trump employment law.
No.
They sort of sit beside each other.
I'm coming down with a firm, it depends on this one.
So you've got a spectrum of answers.
That right of access is really important. You know, our starting point is always, if the information is about the other person, they have a right to it. Now, I partly agree with Hayley and I partly agree with Charlotte, but the test is in the Privacy Act, and employment law does not override this part of it. So you can refuse to give that individual parts of that information where the disclosure would involve the unwarranted disclosure of the affairs of the other person. And where you're dealing here with, and there I would take into account the nature of the exchange, where somebody reached out for help, they were in a vulnerable moment, the nature of the information. It's intimate about their personal feelings, and also the consequences for the other party. These determine, weighing all these, to determine the extent to which that disclosure of the complainant's affairs would be unwarranted in that case.
Yeah, bring it back to what I was saying before. If there's no actual complaint, no formal complaint and no investigation that's going to happen as a result of this, then with that, there must be another factor that an employer or whoever holds the information takes into account, because there's no potential repercussions for the individual.
Okay. So we start with, okay, let's make it real. Hayley writes this long letter about how stressed out she is because Charlotte's so mean and bullying at work.
It's a real life scenario.
Charlotte gets wind of it and asks for a copy of it. First thing, is it information about Charlotte? Well, yes, lots of it is. Information can be about more than one thing. So the starting point is she's got a right of access to it. Hang on a minute, it's also very intimate information about Hayley. How does that swing the balance? Well, that takes us away and says, okay, your right is subject to Hayley's entitlement to be protected against that. Again, the factors that Charlotte mentioned about whether there is any investigation going on, if there are consequences, that goes to the little word in this section that I'm describing, unwarranted. So the greater the consequences there are going to be for Charlotte of not seeing this, or of the organisation acting on it, the more warranted the intrusion into Hayley's privacy will be.
I like it.
It's
definitely
not a black and white answer, is it?
No.
Often we do get this one. It's, it's got some other people's names in it. Well, that's probably not enough. It talks about other things about them. Can we disclose it? Well, it's not that simple either. It really isn't simple. And I guess that dovetails back to the, you've got a certain amount of time to go through and evaluate information, and you've got to make calls that are not just, it's got someone else's name, don't release it. You've actually got to think about the information, don't you?
Exactly. And we don't think about documents. You don't say, well, we did this for a different purpose, therefore it's not your information. And this is not on your file, therefore you can't have it.
That's my
we've got to wash this stuff out of our brain and think, what is the information? Who has rights and responsibilities over this information?
Okay, let's talk about a settlement agreement situation in the employment context. Have a mediation with an employee, you're close to an exit deal. Can you put in a clause in the agreement saying that the employee will not make future information requests under the Privacy Act?
No.
No?
No.
We'll agree on that one.
Next slide. No.
Beginning to sit back again, but anyway.
Yeah, you can't contract out of the Privacy Act anyway.
How can a company deal with repeated and potentially vexatious personal information requests? And there are some very angry ex-employees who make a habit of sending in these types of requests. So it's a practical issue.
Have you ever heard of the Queenstown resident by the name of him.com? So he gave us generously some jurisprudence on this very question, not in an employment context, but in a kind of extradition context. But he made requests of 50 different organisations, and the Attorney General said transfer them all to us, and he refused them all on the basis that they were vexatious requests. We investigated and said, yeah, we think they are. The Human Rights Review Tribunal said, no, they weren't vexatious, he was entitled to this, and awarded him $90,000 for his hurt feelings. And the High Court turned that over and said, don't be so stupid. These were vexatious requests and you didn't get $90,000 worth of hurt feelings. So that's
it's
probably
literally the court judgment.
Yes, it's on the way to Court of Appeal. Anyone who's sort of wondering about this, I'd recommend that you read that High Court decision in that case, because we don't like to see the law abused. It's there to promote individual rights, it's not there as a weapon. So if you have some genuine reason to doubt the motivation, if you think that people are engaged in an abusive process, then you might refuse a request. So for example, they just repeatedly make requests in order to try and stave off a disciplinary action, and say, well, I'm not coming to that meeting because you still haven't met my 35th request for information. You might say, well, that would be vexatious.
And the guidance talks about vexatious, frivolous and trivial. It's the three things. Because if it's a trivial request, which we deal with quite a lot, then we say principles.
Right. Once again, in settlement negotiations, employee requests that all records of the employment relationship or employment relationship problem are destroyed. Is this something which we can agree to? Can we agree with an employee to destroy all information we have about them?
Well, Principle 9 says you don't keep information longer than is necessary. But we talked about this before in relation to the potential for a regulator, or you might need the information at a future date. So
it may not necessarily be just their information.
Yes.
And other claims. So lawyers would probably go, don't keep it if you don't need it, but you might need it for another purpose.
And there's other obligations out there under different statutes, so minimum entitlements and requirements and the Holidays Act and leave.
Yeah, so in terms of my contribution, is it something you can agree to? Probably. There are people here who work for government agencies that are subject to the Public Records Act, so that's a hard no. But if it's your own business and you happen to burn the record which shows why you paid out 50 grand, then good on you. If you want to destroy the entire file so that in 6 months' time you're walking down the corridor to the staff cafeteria and you see this person that's been hired by another manager, good on you again. So I think there are good reasons for keeping hold of some of that.
I'd never advise clients to agree to those terms.
Yeah, the Privacy Act doesn't make you destroy it, and it doesn't give people the right to insist that you destroy it.
And there's better terms put in a settlement agreement. Non-disparagement already protects the employee, but you can still hang on to the record if you need it for a regulated purpose.
I just briefly off the slides again there's the idea in the GDPR of the right to be forgotten.
Yes.
I'm not sure there's an equivalent in New Zealand at the moment, or at least not directly. Do you think that's something which we should be seeing or which would be helpful?
Well, there was a bit of discussion about it at Select Committee. I don't think we'll see a GDPR version of it in the bill. We have smatterings of it through our legislation. So, for example, people have a right to correct information. And the definition of correction includes deletion. So people can say, hey, you said I was drunk at work. I want you to delete that because it's so inaccurate as to be prejudicial to me. And I wasn't drunk. I was in the first stages of a hypoglycemic kind of state. So let's just delete it all. But no, we don't have a GDPR style right to be forgotten.
I just want to deal with inadvertent disclosures. Let's imagine a recruitment situation where the individuals are being advised that they've been unsuccessful in their application and the HR manager inadvertently copies everyone on the copy line as opposed to using blind copy, which we have seen before. What should that manager do? And how could the organisation as a whole best manage that situation? Any ideas?
This happens so commonly, doesn't it? And the organisation could have had some processes perhaps in place to have that 1 minute, 2 minute delay. Most of us don't have it because we just want to get emails out. And unfortunately, once it's exited the firewall for you, generally you can't call back. We can't. I've tried. Not for this. But if you've forgotten to do a spell check, for this up, then you might try and pull it back. Doesn't work. So when I'm looking at it from my client's perspective, it's whether actually sending an apology might make it worse, because then you've drawn to the attention that if they look at all of the names, that they will be people who have also been rejected. So there's no easy fix. It's more a culture of should we escalate this up because it's an issue, and then when we've got mandatory reporting breach stuff coming through, if you don't have a culture where people realise, A, if this was a mistake, we won't do it again, and B, escalating it up so that it's being dealt with at a level where it can be assessed as to whether or not you do have to do a disclosure. I think it really comes back to that culture as well. So you don't want somebody to get in too much trouble either, because if you do, then you don't have a culture of raising the fact there's a problem in the first place. So there's no easy fix. I wish there was. Most businesses do to that one.
Good point, I think. Say sorry. Actually own it, I think, is a really important one. And invite people to treat the information with respect. So please don't contact each other. Please don't use this. If you appeal to people's better nature, often you'll find that they'll rise to the occasion. I'm an eternal optimist.
And do you think there could be liability for organisations in the future who don't have proper systems in place to prevent this type of disclosure?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Weirdly, what we're going to see in this bill is a mandatory breach notification scheme, as Hayley described. I don't know whether this one would make it as a reportable matter, but the thing is, I'm not getting any extra powers to enforce this legislation. There are penalties for failing to report a serious breach, but there are no penalties for the actual breach.
Yeah. It's slightly strange, don't you think?
Yeah, it is weird.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, those are the questions which we had prepared.
Slidos?
And I'm going to go on to the Slidos.
While you do that, I have a brief advertising.
Feel free.
How many, you're all HR practitioners, right? How many people have done privacy and employment on our website, a free online course? Almost none. Free, and you get CPD points, and you get a certificate at the end of it. And it's developed between our office with subject matter expertise and Learning Works in Waikato, who gave us the pedagogy. So I would commend that to you. It's not taking money out of these people's pockets, so don't worry.
Please don't worry.
It'll just improve the quality of questions you bring to them.
So waiting for it to connect. Are there any questions from the audience while we wait? Is anyone willing to put up their hand and ask a question? No one's got any burning issues?
I have actually one while we wait. And John and I spoke about this outside. You all know that when you receive a request for disclosure of personal information, there's a time frame that you have to respond to that, 20 working days. And we've been sort of operating on the basis that you respond and you say, yes, we will give you your information. And it might take us a wee while to collate it afterwards, to give you a little bit more breathing space. John, can you just share with the audience your view on that and how you interpret that piece of legislation?
Sure. I mean, your obligation when you get a request for an individual personal information is to respond as soon as reasonably practicable and to convey your decision. Now, my own view is that you can't convey a decision unless you've actually been through the information and looked at it. So it's fake to say on day 19, oh, we've decided to release the information to you, but it's going to take another 2 months to do that. And that, I think that's cute, but not compliant with the Act. So the appropriate course, if you've got a really long file or a bazillion emails to go through, first thing, actually, is the information readily retrievable? Should we just refuse this outright? Second, what is the cost of providing the information to the individual in this case? And third, should we extend the time frame for making that decision? and give them the information, a proper decision at the end of that extended period.
Great.
I've got a slightly connected question to that, which is you mentioned the cost of providing that information to the individual. In your experience, in your view, what cost do you see as being able to be passed on to the individual making the request? Because there seems to be very limited costs that can be passed on.
Do you hear the question at the back?
It's a question about...
The question is about charging for access to personal information. What elements do I think it's reasonable to charge for? Well, you can't charge for making the decision. You can't charge for saying, no, you're not going to get that bit. That doesn't make any sense. Reasonable charges for goods and materials. And we typically start with the Ministry of Justice / Cabinet guidelines for charging for official information, which are available on the Ministry of Justice website. They're not always going to work because you might be in a private sector organisation that's just unreasonable. It's $38 per half hour of staff time after a first free hour and that kind of thing. But our newsletter that went out, you can all subscribe to our newsletter, by the way, at privacy.org.nz. We had a story today about a law firm which charged $19,000 to release the client file to the client. Now, it seemed to me that this was kind of more about a hope to get some disputed fees back. And the decision that, and this is the one thing I can do under the Privacy Act, the one binding decision I can make, is I can set a fee for that cost. So I went $19,000. Well, I think you can charge a reasonable amount for the time and equipment required. And I sent someone down to Stationery Warehouse because the law firm said there's 1.9 gigabytes worth of material. I found that you could buy a 5 gigabyte USB for $8. And we figured that dragging and dropping would take less than an hour, so we fixed the fee at $8.
The law firm was not Kensington Swan.
No, no.
You wouldn't get much for 19 grand.
Kudos to that law firm for trying. Are there any other questions from the audience? They're very quiet on the Slido, so I'm not seeing anything come through. No? Look, on that note, I'd just like to thank our panel. It's been an insightful and engaging session, a little bit of humour, but also a lot of really useful information. I think privacy is at the heart of making a successful business and organisation work going forward. It's fundamental to the way we work today, thinking about employees' rights in this area and how we manage and store their information. So thank you very much to our panel, in particular John, and I'd be grateful if you could all show your appreciation.